Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 248, brought to you by Osseo Gear. We're back in Illinois, and Don, we have a very special guest with us tonight. I'll let you introduce him. For all the people who haven't maybe just started listening, that haven't heard the story after story after story.
Oh boy. It's the prodigy, Wes Delks. These guys are both here hunting on my farm for a few days, helping me with some management, trying to get some does shot and some bucks, and so blessed to have him here.
Grateful to be here.
So Wes, our podcast, how many people listen to it and watch it, has really grown over the last probably 8 months. We had another one of those explosions of listeners. We really haven't had a good Wes Delks story in a while. And the people who've listened to us from the beginning know some of these. What's it like to just turn the podcast on every now and then and hear a very embarrassing or us poke fun at you about something that you're not even here to defend yourself?
I don't even get the chance to come back and jab at you on the podcast. So, hey, that's part of having fun, having good friends, though.
Don, we've probably told too many stories of Wes over the years.
Well, I know there's a lot of guys that when they have Wes at their home for consulting, that they'll hang a sock in the bathroom.
How many rolls of toilet paper have consulting clients given you?
Got a few dozen, yep.
So folks, he has 2 young children. So instead of toilet paper, please donate diapers. When he comes to your house, it'd help him out.
We're going through them quickly right
that's
now.
The biggest expense, I think,
2 under 2. Yep.
in the Delks family. So we got a good show for you tonight. We got a lot of questions to answer. We want to make sure that everybody heard last week about the Shipshewana show, the Midwest Sportsman's Classic by FAE. There's some announcements there that you need to know. I heard a bunch of people made their reservations this last week. And then the big reason we have Wes on the show this week is after the Osseo break, he's actually going to talk about closing the deal on his Indiana target buck. But more importantly, this new property that he and his wife have bought and put so much hard work into. And I think that's a story that we wanted to share on the podcast, a different side of it than what the hunt video. But before that, Don, we're on the backside of the peak of the rut. You've been calling lockdown for the last week. Let's just talk about general hunting and weather for this first segment.
Well, yeah, we got at least another week of lockdown, and weather early this coming week when this podcast is released. Here in central Illinois anyway, the weather is supposed to be pretty warm. It's supposed to warm up from what it is now. But then towards the tail end of the week, it's supposed to really cool off. And in fact, they did have some snow flurries in the forecast, but I think they've taken those out and they've kind of, brought that forecasted temperatures up just a little bit. But still, it's looking like towards the end of next week, it's going to be way more favorable for deer movement than what it is early in the week. But still in that lockdown phase, and we've got at least another week of that. And then the bucks are really going to be scrambling to find those last hot does, and that's a great opportunity to kill a giant.
So I'm going to dive into this term lockdown a little bit on this episode. We didn't prepare this, but since we do the rut report every night on Chasing Giants TV social media, you've been using this term lockdown. I believe off the top of my head you said it first either on November 6th or 7th, and everybody, it was like you had just contradicted the second commandment in the Bible, saying no way it's lockdown. So I want to do a segment here as it's based off, we're in the lockdown. What are you saying about the cycle of the lockdown? Because it starts earlier than what people, I think, they overgeneralize the term lockdown. So walk us through why you were calling the first phases of the lockdown happening around the 6th, 7th, or 8th, to what it is now, because it statistically it works like a bell curve, just like anything else. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, there was one person that commented when I first used the term lockdown, that there's no way it's locked down. The lockdown is, I think he had exact dates. The lockdown is November 16th to the 20th. So it doesn't work like that, folks. It's not cut and dried. Anytime a doe comes in heat, a mature buck is going to be locked down with her, and a lot of times multiple bucks will be locked down with her, and they'll run her out in the middle of an open field. I can't tell you how many hot does with bucks I've seen in the middle of day, clear out in the middle of wide open ag fields this week.
Today?
Yeah, we've seen it today, but I mean all week I've seen it. Al Foster and I this week, we took a couple-hour drive to look at some property and hung some cameras there, but on our drive each way we were seeing bucks out in the middle of wide open fields with a hot doe. And when those bucks are locked down with those hot does out of the way places, they're very difficult to kill. They're not, moving through their typical haunts. They're out in these out of the way places, and they're not moving much. They're just stuck there with that doe, and very, very difficult to kill. But as long as there's a hot doe, there's going to be some sort of lockdown
of that specific buck or two bucks with that doe.
Right. It's not like every buck in the woods is locked down. Even in the peak of lockdown, every buck in the woods is not going to be locked down.
So is it, if I overgeneralize the topic, and there's exceptions to every rule, we say that, but if you have these bucks, as the fever pitch of pre-rut builds up, and you got these bucks jockeying, sparring, fighting, running, looking for the hot doe, that first doe comes in, the most mature dominant buck that's going to whip everybody else is probably taking that doe. That's what they're fighting for. Is that a correct statement or wrong?
It is, but when there's so few hot does, that doe could have 10 bucks with her, and they're all out there, and the big dominant buck, he's chasing these other bucks off. It's kind of like a herd of elk. You've got the herd bull and you got all these satellite bulls, and it's the same kind of situation. And when that dominant buck is running off one of these lesser bucks, well, it's very easy for another buck to slip in and breed that doe. So it's just a constant shuffle of bucks.
So is that why a lot of times, especially in big ag country, that they'll push those does out in the middle of that open field so that no other bucks, unless you try to get them away from the other bucks? Is that the reason?
Well, that's the theory. I mean, I don't know if anybody can say for sure, but once they get that doe out in the middle of nowhere, theoretically it's really hard for another buck to come across them, because that's not typically where a buck is just going to be traveling through. But the thing of it is, you got to remember, a hot doe, I believe from my experience years ago with captive deer, I believe that a buck can smell a hot doe for at least a mile. So she may be out in the middle of a wide open cornfield locked down with a buck or two, but any bucks downwind of her are going to smell her and come in there to try to join the party.
So this is why, as we get into the rut, and you were using that term lockdown, that starts with the more mature, more dominant bucks, but you still see a lot of bucks, 2 and 3 year olds, that are going and checking scrapes. They're going through your rut funnels, they're in front of your cameras, but then everybody's screaming at us because we use the word lockdown. But I think there's just a little disconnect with.
Yeah, I just think that different hunters have different ideas of what the lockdown really is, and I'm sure that there's people that disagree with me and what I describe as the lockdown. But we're at peak lockdown right now. It's November 15th as we're recording this. We are at peak lockdown. It's been going on for about a week, and it's going to last for about another week. Those 2 middle weeks in November in much of the Midwest, and that varies from different regions too, but here in the Midwest, those middle 2 weeks of November is peak lockdown. The first week, it's leading up to it, and there is an occasional doe that's got bucks locked down. And at that last week, there's still going to be some stragglers that come into heat late that are going to be locked down.
So the mature bucks that we see maybe they're coming off that first doe looking for second, third, fourth.
Right.
Okay. Wes, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. We're going to talk about your farm here after the Osseo segment.
Yeah.
The one beauty in you having your place the way it is you got a lot of eyes on your specific property. You know, you live on the property like Don does. What have you noticed? I mean, you've been chasing this buck called UHAUL that we're going to be able to tell the story of on a video, but what have you noticed? Was the timing of the movement and seeing does out in field similar to what Don was seeing, or did you see something different over in Indiana?
Absolutely. The guys on the Chasing Giants TV group text, what Don was seeing, very similar story. The night that I shot UHAUL, he heard a 2-year-old and a doe messing around and came to come check it out. So was very similar to hearing the guys on the Chasing Giants TV group text. Just that the reports that they were saying seemed pretty consistent with what I was seeing.
And I think you had some of the same weather that we had here. It was very warm.
Yep.
And so we were talking the other day, talking about weather. This is a little bit of a sidetrack. I don't remember, you didn't, we both talked about it, seeing this many east winds in early season that just handcuffed a lot of guys in their plans.
The last part of September, there was a 10-day stretch where we had in Indiana, we had 10 days of easterly winds. And I have never seen 10 days of easterly winds ever before.
Yeah.
And then when we got into October, the location where I ended up killing UHAUL, which I, from the beginning, thought that was going to be my best opportunity, I needed an easterly wind.
And you didn't have it the whole
month. And then
the
first 20 days, I hunted one time, I think, like on the 10th, and then by October 20th, it was like the second time. So I was struggling to get the wind I needed, but eventually it took till November 13th, but that was the tree that it finally happened in.
So Don, there's two big factors, and let's talk specifically for Illinois, because Michigan came in on gun season, Kentucky's in on gun season, Indiana comes in this weekend that the podcast is released. We have high temps, then dropping temps, and then you got Orange Army coming in. Number one, how does that change what's going on in the deer woods for everybody? And then the second part of that, what's the strategy on your properties as gun season unfolds around you?
Well, the strategy on my property is to put as little pressure as possible on the property during gun season, let the gun pressure push deer in here. But you know what's going to happen? I can predict this with fair degree of certainty here in Illinois that the gun season is falling a little bit later this year than typically. Typically it's 16th, 17th, 18th, somewhere in there. And this year, I think it doesn't come in until the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. We're going to be at the end of that lockdown phase when gun season hits. And I think what's going to happen is that gun season is going to bring that rut activity to a screeching halt. And typically, there's going to be some after that, but it's going to be. It's only a 3-day gun season, and what you see that day before gun season and what you see that day after is going to be day and night different.
So you think we're going to come out of gun season almost in late season strategy at that point?
It's going to be winding down really quick. Yeah.
Interesting. But you're right. It's almost a full week later than what normal gun season is typically being, and I guess that's because Thanksgiving is a week later.
It's 28th.
This year. Thanksgiving's a lot of times around the 24th, and it's about 5 days later. So
just the way the calendar falls this year.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break and listen to our friends from Osseo. Make sure you're following them on social media and also watching Joe Miles's hunt reports on Chasing Giants. He just left South Carolina and is on a Midwest tour of Kansas, Kentucky, and Ohio. So make sure you're following those social media channels and also Chasing Giants TV to get the latest on what's going on with Osseo and Joe Miles. We'll be right back.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit AsioGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Asio Gear, prepare to be invisible.
All right, well, the story for tonight is, I told Wes we wanted him on the podcast to talk about this buck, and there's going to be a video produced of the buck called UHAUL, and I don't want him to even get into the name of why he named him UHAUL yet. We're going to save that for the video, but there's a bigger story here that I think he's really proud of this video, and this buck, and I think it's a cool story. He talked to us a little bit about it yesterday. But there's a second phase of this that I'm not sure is going to be in the video. Maybe it will. But this is the first time that you and your wife Madison have gone out on a limb and bought property. You've worked your tail off to be able to buy it, renovated the house, done all this habitat. I want to talk for a couple minutes about what it's like as a young man that's gone out on faith and bought a piece of property and put 3 years of all this work into it. Mm-hmm. This is your first buck you've taken off of it, and I think that's cool. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, just feeling very humble, very grateful for the opportunity to so many people. I mean, to Don, to both you guys for the opportunities that I have. Obviously, to the Lord. I mean, just to have that farm and a supportive wife. But so we bought the farm in 2021. And we bought it. It was absolutely a farm that needed work. It was not good quality deer cover. It was not a good hunting farm. There wasn't big deer there. It was a project farm. And the reason that I bought it is I tell people, consulting clients, that you have to ask yourself 2 questions. And can you access the cover from multiple different directions? And how much of the property line is cover to cover? How much of your property line can be hunted on? And if you can answer those 2 questions positively, that's a farm that has potential for long-term management. And that's what that farm was. Like I said, it was not a good farm, but I saw potential there. And so that's what we started off with. And that buck, UHAUL in 2021, I got 3 pictures of him that year that we bought it in October 2021, the rest of the season. And then the next year, 2022, after 16 acres of planting switchgrass, logging the farm, designating a sanctuary, planting 12 acres of food, thousands of trees, the property had a facelift, and the next year I had 876 pictures of him. And with each 2023, he's more of a homebody. This year, I sent you that picture last night of he shows up on my farm on September 29th, and there literally hasn't been a 48-hour period where I didn't know where he was at. And I know that there's bucks, the Brandon Epperson buck. There's bucks like that where in bait states, there's that kind of consistency. But Indiana not being a bait state, there's not very many mature bucks that you know where he's at within every 48-hour period, or in most days, multiple times. So it was pretty cool to see a buck that I will describe in 2021 as a transient buck, and then he's a homebody, and then his core shrinks. And this year, I would say 98% of his time was probably on 40 acres, and 90% of his time was probably on 15 acres. Wow. In the last 55 days. And to see that process of the farm change to where we could have that opportunity was pretty special.
So Don, I got 2 questions for you before we pick on Wes and make him talk unprepared again. But there's two points I want to make, and the first one is, do you remember looking back on the years of buying your grandparents' farm here that you've added on to over the years, but do you remember that first, like Wes just described, that first moment where you started putting the work in for, the habitat plan, and then getting that first piece of, I don't know if satisfaction is
that it's working.
Yeah, the ROI that, hey, this is, now you went through a lot of iterations that he's got a head start, that you've said that many times, but do you remember that time looking back on it that you're like, wow, this is going to be something cool?
Yeah, I remember one late season hunt, and things were starting to come together on the farm, and I was starting to see some deer, more than I ever expected to see, really. There was one late season hunt when I seen 17 bucks, and I wasn't expecting to see 2 or 3, and there were 17 of them in one hunt, and most of them were 1.5-year-old bucks, but things really started, at that point, the wheels started turning. And when I listened to Wes talk, a couple of things really strike me. First of all, this was not a deer farm. This was a young man seeing potential in a property. It was not a deer farm whatsoever. And I'll bet you less than 1% of the deer hunters in North America would have given that farm a second look. Wes knew what he was looking for, and isolation was a big part of it. He knew he could build it because he'd seen what I'd built here, and that really struck me. And then the other thing is, how many people buy a farm knowing that they're not going to kill a deer on it for 3 or 4 years? They know that they're going to put 3 or 4 years of work in first and then start hunting. And that's kind of what sets Wes apart from the average deer hunter, is the ability to see the future in a property. And Wes and I have talked about it many times with our clients, our consulting clients. A lot of our clients are repeats. We're going back, multiple years and looking at multiple properties for these guys, and every single time that we go back to a repeat client, the second property is way better than the first one. And once you see it firsthand, and once we showed the clients, here's what's wrong with the property you got now. We're going to make it the best it can possibly be, but here's the issues. Here's the big issues. And Wes talked about access being one of them. But you need that isolation. You can't be surrounded by wooded cover where people are going to be sitting right on your line. All your neighbors are sitting on your line and taking advantage of all your hard work. But it's kind of gratifying to me to see Wes just take some of the lessons that I learned over a period of decades and condensed it down into, he knows way more. How old are you now, Wes?
33.
33 years old. He knows way more at 33 than I did at 43 about setting up properties and killing big deer. And that's a tribute to him.
Well, the second question I want you to comment on refers back to what he was talking about earlier. How many guys in the hunting, not industry, but hunters out there, would have a mature buck on a property that they live on, that they had that kind of documentation knowing that he was already there, and would not hunt for over 20 days because they didn't have the right wind? And we talk about discipline.
I didn't hunt him in that time.
Huh?
I hunted him twice the first 20 days.
Right, but only hunted him twice, knowing that he's there.
Yeah.
We talk about discipline, and I don't know of many hunters that would have their eye in the document. You should, when we produce the video of this buck, the documentation that you had with this deer is like nothing I've ever seen before. And I really want that video, just Steve, to really dive into that with you. But I don't believe that the majority of hunters would have set out and not pushed it too hard going after that deer, saying, there's people in the hunting industry that'll just get belligerent saying, what are you waiting for? Go in and kill that deer. I don't care. Go do it. Mm-hmm. And a buck like that could just as easily have disappeared and never come back and been shot by the neighbors. What's it say about, it's got to be pride. You got to be proud of this guy.
Oh, yeah.
To show the discipline to put this type of history, but then set back because the conditions weren't right yet.
Well, the thing that struck me with Wes from the beginning, if I go back and kind of tell the story of how we met, so Wes's mother-in-law is like my second cousin. So, she contacted me years ago and said, hey, my daughter just married this guy, he's a big deer hunter, and he wants to meet you, and I'd like to do that for him for Christmas. Would you have lunch with us for Christmas?
Yep.
And that's what I want to give him for a Christmas present. I said, yeah, sure. And so, she shows up with her family, her daughter and Wes and her husband, and I've got Robin there with me, and meet Wes for the first time. And then it wasn't too long, he was coming to my house here and there, helping with projects. If I'd shoot a deer, he'd show up to see it. But the thing that struck me was he was always inquisitive about why are you doing this, why are you doing that. And a lot of young hunters are trying to impress other people. Look at my pictures, I got this one on my camera, and I do this, I do that. And with Wes, it was always questions. Why are you doing this, and how do you do that, and tell me about this buck, and how did that hunt go down? And he was just absorbing everything I said like a sponge, and that really struck me from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, the patience and the discipline that you had, I think, are pretty rare. I just believe that a lot of people would have pushed the limit going in and killing that deer.
Had pretty good examples of how to hunt them right.
I want to switch this just a little bit to talk a little bit about the trail camera kind of strategy that you put not only on your farm that helped put this documentation together. This is going to be a really cool story when we tell it on video, but also how you challenge your consulting clients. You've had this part of your plan and your discussion with clients all the time that not only do we make our stand locations great, we make our trail camera locations
trail camera locations.
Yeah.
Yep.
Talk, not necessarily, you don't have to go into the specifics. I don't know that we can do that without a visual, but how does that philosophy relate to not only managing a property, but even this story of UHAUL?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to put that history together. It's not just, a lot of times we lose focus and we only worry about our stand locations and access and wind, but you've also applied a different kind of technique to trail cameras to also not only put intrusion on, but also get as many pictures as you do.
Well, my farm is a little unique, kind of like the Higgins farm, because of the isolation factor. And there's these two balls that we juggle, one that I call holdability and the other one that I call huntability. And with clients, a lot of times, a property only has a certain set level of holdability, and we can help make it more huntable. But the potential layout of a property determines its holdability. And an isolated farm just has a much better ability to make a buck's core right here. And that's how my farm is. And within the sanctuary, within the core, I want to manipulate traffic into a manner that he's either going to go past a stand location or he's going to go past a trail camera location. And on my farm, I've got 8 trail camera locations. I told Don on the farm last night, as far as bucks go on my property, if I don't get his picture for one day, I'll chalk it up to chance. If I don't get his picture for 2 days, I'm beginning to wonder. And if I don't get his picture for 3 days, he's not there. And you just can't say that with a lot of properties.
No, I don't know of many in the country that could probably say that. Don, you've worked very hard on this farm for 30 years, and we get the heat that we do about this farm, but building stand and camera locations has been a fundamental principle that you've done for a lot of years. And I know of people that have a fraction of the acreage and 3 times as many cameras that you do, but they don't get as many pictures. Building trail camera locations is just as important as stand locations.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I talk about making good stand locations a great stand locations, whatever you can do to manipulate that exact spot to drive more traffic past that tree. What's the same way with a camera location? You want to manipulate that to get more deer traffic in front of that camera. And a lot of guys, I see it all the time on consulting visits. There's cameras in places. I'm thinking, well, I wouldn't expect to get 100 pictures there in the course of a year. When in some of the places where I've got cameras, I'm getting 100 pictures there in a half a day.
Right.
Literally getting a couple hundred pictures a day, and that's not over any sort of bait or mineral or anything like that. It's just that you've concentrated that deer movement down to a narrow spot, and you got a camera on it. And at certain times of the year, when deer get on a real strict feeding pattern, the summer is a good example. You get those bucks coming out to an alfalfa or a soybean field, and unless they're disturbed, they're taking the same route day after day after day. And if you got that camera facing out into where they're feeding, they're back and forth all day long in front of that camera. And it's basically the same principle with camera locations as it is tree stand locations. Put as much traffic in front of it as possible.
And Wes, cell camera or not, building these locations that doesn't put pressure on the core sanctuary is another thing that you and I have talked. We see clients doing all the time.
Yeah.
We'll go in and we're walking the whole property over the winter, and then there's a trail camera right in the middle of their sanctuary. Yeah. Building that to where you're still getting the picture, but it's not putting pressure. That's the secret sauce, right?
Well, I mean, obviously we're using AA ultimate lithium batteries, setting them up a lot of times in September, and not touching that trail camera until shed season. And if the coon knocks it over or if something happens to it, a lot of guys are going to go in there and fix it. And if that happens to my trail camera, that trail camera is literally, it's a loss of data. So, I mean, when I set that trail camera up in September, I know I'm not going to see it again until March. And it's just, you take that chance that a limb's going to fall in front of it or something, but that's the way it goes. I'm not going into the sanctuary.
Lack of intrusion is the key to everything, but data points is very important. So balancing those two.
Absolutely.
I don't have anything else unless you do and want to go into questions. What do you think?
Well, I could go on a rant if you want.
Go for it.
Rant?
We
hear it.
We had it. Should I get your purple-haired freak over here off the wall? Or?
No, I don't have a rant for this week. I did get a lot of feedback on the drone conversation we had last week, and one thing I will throw out is a couple people pointed out to me that we do not own the airspace above our property. It's legal for people to fly these drones wherever they want. And I kind of challenged that a little bit with a couple of people, and I said, so where does that start? Does it start 1 inch off of the ground? If a person is free to fly his drone wherever he wants, does that mean he can fly it right outside your teenage daughter's bedroom window? I mean, there's got to be a limit to these drones, and I just hope that there's somebody listening, some state representative or something, that will address this issue, because there's just got to be a limit to what you can do on someone else's property, even if it's in the air.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about last week. I got you fired up when I said that it should be trespassing to use to fly a drone over somebody else's to scout their side of a property line. And I just feel it's ethically and morally wrong. It's no different. You're trying to obtain data from someone else's work. And I feel that's morally and ethically wrong. It's no different than trespassing and stealing, and that's when you went on the rant. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to defend their position because they want to do that, and then, of course, that's what got you onto the deer pimp conversation. That unfortunately we had a lot of our listeners with children that had to explain what a pimp was after last week's episode.
Someone that takes advantage of someone else's work, put it that way.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.
Questions?
Questions. We got questions here. Wes, do you want to chime in on that one, Wes? Wes, Wes avoids controversy. That's one thing he's learned. He didn't learn that from me.
But that's why he's not on a weekly podcast. He does not want any part.
I stay off of social media as much as I can.
Well, that's probably
That's
smart. All right. First question comes from Kirsten Tepe from Oakland City, Indiana. It says, Don and Terry, I've seen that there is a new record captive deer with over 1,000 inches of antler. Although it isn't my thing, it makes me wonder. To make this happen, what are they feeding? Do you believe that you could increase his size, with Real World Wildlife Products line of plot seeds, feeds, and minerals? Thanks for the podcast. Really looking forward to new episodes every week. Well, I haven't seen this deer you're talking about, but I can tell you that no, you couldn't feed him Real World Products and get him bigger. It's all genetics. It'd be like, taking a 7'6" NBA player and thinking that you can feed him something different and he's going to be 8 foot. It's genetics that determine that antler size. And yeah, he's got to have good nutrition, but you guys don't get hung up on the idea that there's some super hyped up feed that these captive deer breeders are feeding. Now they're feeding a very nutritious, solid diet to these deer, but it's the genetics that's making them so big, and the nutrition is just allowing them to reach their full genetic potential.
Hey Wes, I want you to chime in on this because you being a graduate of the Purdue Boilermakers, you actually had the opportunity in college. I even saw pictures. There, believe it or not, folks, there is banners on campus, at least there used to be, of a young Wes Delks holding a baby fawn.
Long time ago.
I can probably find that picture and put it on this podcast so everybody can
That's
see.
all right. No.
But we've heard Dr. Strickland talk about every buck has a glass ceiling. Do you remember those conversations?
Uh-huh.
So what Don's saying is if Danny DeVito and Simone Biles had a baby, it wouldn't be Shaquille O'Neal, right? You got 2 4-foot people not having 7'2". So genetic coding happens, and there's a ceiling with what you did, not only working at Real World, but even going back to Purdue. Does nutrition help us get to that ceiling, or does nutrition change that ceiling?
I raised captive deer as well for 7 years, and about the time frame that Don was too. And yeah, to have big antlers, it takes age, nutrition, and genetics. And in the captive deer world, genetics is why we have 3, 4, 5, 6, apparently 1,000-inch antlers, but they gotta be fed the right stuff to get there.
Genetics is all part of the agriculture industry. There is farmers that will work for generations to build a herd of Black Angus cattle for a specific bloodline. Mm-hmm. So captive deer, horse racing would be another. We have a very good friend of ours that was a consultant of yours that is now really big into horse racing. Genetics are the key to all of that.
Yep.
Nutrition just gets you to that glass.
Yeah.
So you got a genetic ceiling, and nutrition determines how close that animal gets to that ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not going past it. Nutrition will never bring him past that ceiling. It will bring him up to it.
That's set at fetal programming at the time of conception.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Strickland talks about that a lot.
They did a lot of studies
at Mississippi State Deer Lab. So I know if you go search out his podcast, you'll probably find a lot more information on it by smarter individuals than us.
Yeah, I'll throw out there that this winter I'm going to be speaking at a number of places, and I've got a brand new presentation. Changed my mind on an idea or two based on real world experience right here on my farm. The Iowa Deer Classic, I'll be presenting that there. You guys may want to attend that. We got an event in Kansas. I don't remember the date for that. The Kansas Whitetail Summit. You remember the date, Wes? Are you going to be there? You are, aren't you?
I will be there. Talking about managing for bigger bucks.
Yeah, the Dr. Shipley is going to be speaking there as well. Multiple speakers, and then there's a couple more. I'm going to be at Mount Hope, Ohio in January 24th, I believe it is. These dates are going to be posted on my website real soon, so you can check on those. But anyway, I'm going to dig into this topic with with slides showing real life examples here on my farm, and the whole management of the buck herd on a property. I think that I don't expect everybody attending to agree with what I'm going to say, but I'll bet you that I get the wheels turning in everybody's mind and give you some good food for thought. So, next question comes from Zane Baldwin from Hastings, Nebraska. It says, "Hey Don and Terry, thanks for all the free knowledge you give out. My question is about rope scrapes. I have a couple ropes that have been out for a few years and usually gets lots of activity. Well, this summer the deer ate the end of the rope off to where it is taped off. The deer have not hit the ropes this year hardly at all. Have you ever experienced this, and if so, what did you do to get deer started using the scrape again? Thanks for considering my question. Good luck to both of you the rest of the season." Yeah, Zane, there's some of those softer ropes. I don't know. I don't know what the material is, but I've had the same thing. I bought a spool of this real soft rope, and the deer literally where it was frayed at the end. I usually use a plastic zip tie, and I'll go up about 6 or 8 inches from the end and put that zip tie on, cut off the extra, and then fray the end of that rope. And for whatever that softer rope, the deer just love to eat it. The other thing that I found is there's certain scents that you can put on that rope that the deer will eat. And I've been experimenting with some different scents and such this year, and there's certain scents that'll make the deer just eat that rope. Some of the ropes that I've had out the longest, that have lasted the longest, it's more of a coarse, rougher material. And the deer don't seem to eat that or want to eat it, and it just lasts a whole lot longer. So I'm going to be a little more selective on the rope I buy from now on. I probably won't order any online. I want to go to somewhere where I can actually see what I'm getting.
One of the best trail camera locations on my farm, I had that exact thing happen the first year on my farm, and I just hung another one right next to it. And on my trail camera data sheet, I call that spot double rope, because there's 2 ropes, and that's one of the best spots. So Zane, if I were you, I would just hang another rope right next to it and leave the one that's already chewed up and just leave it right there.
I would change your scent too. Can I talk about my observation today?
Absolutely.
So I don't even know if you heard me talk about this. So I used a new scent today, and I was
in the cattle pasture.
No. I had a code brown today, people, and now Wes is trying to throw it back at me. We were provided some new scent, and Dawn has me really paranoid with stopping bucks now. When the Zychaeus video comes out on the 19th of November, you guys will understand. But I took, and when I went in, I did not cross the path where the deer are. I accessed from the other side, and I got to the base of my tree and took about 2 steps and opened up the scent and just slung a bunch of it, hoping that when the deer came by, especially if he was on a doe, he'd lock him up, give me a way to stop him. And I've never seen anything like it, where I slung that, I got up in the tree, got down back out of the tree for a code brown, then went back up the tree. But then as the deer came by, the does came through, they were eating the dried leaves on the ground where I slung that stuff. And I've never seen deer feeding in the woods where they will eat dried leaves, and it was exactly where I slung that stuff. So I think that there might be some scent out there for whatever reason that they're chomping down on. Anyway, observation, if you've ever had deer eat scent that you've put on the ground, I'd love to hear it, because the 3 of us have never seen a group of does foraging on dried leaves on the forest floor.
Yep. All right, next question comes from Brandon Carroll from Chestertown, Maryland. Says, "Hey Don and Terry, first of all, Trump 2024. Amen, brother. Second, during your postseason scouting, how do you distinguish doe bedding from buck bedding? I've always looked for bedding after the season, but can never tell it's from a buck or a doe. Thank you. God bless again. Trump 2024. Well, your postseason scouting, if you're doing it when there's snow on the ground, if you come across a bedding area where there's several beds, or even 3, if there's 3 beds, it's probably a doe and twins. if there's 5, 6, 8, whatever, it's probably a doe group that's bedded there. If you see a bigger bed in the snow and it's a lone bed, good chance that's a buck. Scrapes, if there's or rubs rather, if there's rubs in close proximity to where you're seeing these single beds, good chance that's a buck as well. I think that we get too hung up on trying to differentiate doe bedding and buck bedding and this and that. I mean, I pay zero attention to that when I'm scouting a new property. I just scouted a new property this week. I wasn't out there trying to determine, well, the doe's bed here and the buck's bed there, and I need to put my stand over there where the buck's bed. I'm looking for thick bedding cover. The thicker it is, the less likely there's going to be human intrusion within that cover. And you're not going to really shoot a buck right in his bed very often anyway. He's going to get up and move. And it's those travel corridors that you want to find. Now you want to hunt as close to that thick bedding cover as possible. It's nice to find some sign like big rubs or scrapes or whatever along that travel route. But I just think that hunters get too hung up on, trying to pick out every little detail, like here's where the doe's bed, here's where the buck's bed, and all that garbage. And I think the internet is probably a big cause for that. You take these newer hunters and they get on, they start watching videos, and guys talk about buck beds and doe beds, and it's more confusing than anything, in my opinion. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't try to narrow down where a buck is bedded to a spot, but rather I'll say, several acre area.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You just gonna
I'm
nod your
good.
head? Okay. Next one comes from Tim Brown from Carrollton, Illinois. He says, Don, I have 3/4 acre soybeans, 3/4 acre deadly dozen surrounded by CRP on 3 sides, with harvested ag beans on the other side. Deer seem to prefer browsing in the middle of the wide open harvested ag bean field rather than feeding in my food plots. Note that food plot beans and ag beans are same variety, planted same day. Do you think the deer could be hesitant to feed in the food plots because of the CRP directly surrounding it on 3 sides? Maybe they feel more safe from predators out in the middle of open ag fields where they can see. Thinking about mowing off some of the CRP adjacent to the plots to give them more comfort when feeding. What are your thoughts on this? Have you ever seen this? Well, Tim, actually deer prefer to feed in bigger, wide open areas, especially at night. I think when it comes to hunting mature bucks, if you're trying to kill one of them on a big, wide open ag field, you're going to spend a lot of seasons between your mature bucks. They like to cover. One thing I would suggest, you noted that the soybeans in your plot are the same ones planted in the field. Why don't you change that up? Why don't you try some real world soybeans in that plot and see the difference? And if you don't think there is a difference, I promise you there is, and that's a good way to see it. But typically what I would expect in a situation like that would be the deer first come out of the cover into the food plot, and then eventually as darkness falls, then they work their way out into the ag field. And I'm just guessing these deer you're seeing out in these wide open ag fields, there's probably more does, fawns, and young bucks. You're probably not seeing too many mature bucks, out there doing that, at least very often. But I would not mow the CRP around my food plot. If anything, I would just change up what you got planted there. The reason they're out in that wide open country is because they're eating the same thing that you've got in your food plot. Give them a reason to be in that plot instead of out in that wide open ag.
I know a lot of times when we prescribe switchgrass or CRP as bedding, we'll actually prescribe to put miscanthus strips inside of it so that when they are coming out of the CRP to feed, we're funneling them down or using structure to where they're closer to your stand versus, one thing about CRP is they can leave that field anywhere to get to wide open whenever they want. So again, it's about structure of what you're doing with bedding and food to funnel the deer a little bit closer within bow range before they get to that big open field.
Yep. Got anything to add there, Wes?
I think you guys said it fantastic.
All right, last question comes from John Semino from Clifton, Illinois. Says, hey, Don and Terry. Don, I know you talk a lot about playing the wind and how much your bucks use the wind to their advantage. How do you hunt the bucks that don't seem to use the wind totally to their advantage during daylight movement? As an example, I've got a buck that uses a particular trail during daylight on a regular basis in December and January. Oddly enough, I get this buck's picture in this spot in daylight in the mornings several times each season in December and January, and almost never get a daylight picture of him at any other time of the year. I recently looked back at each day this buck used this trail and correlated it with the wind direction. And this buck uses this trail in daylight in December and January, and he uses it on every wind direction. I should add that I know the buck is 6 years old, as I've been getting pictures of him since he was 2. Do you encounter bucks like this, and if so, do you still always try to give them the wind, or would you hunt a buck like this with the wind that is most favorable to you, since this buck uses this trail in every wind direction? Thanks, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your season. Well, John, it gets back to that adage that Terry and I talk about a lot, where you don't use the terms always and never when you're hunting deer and even big bucks. You play the odds, because you're going to get an animal that comes along and does something totally different than what you would expect, and then, you just gave a perfect example of one of those. I will say that it's absolutely, in my mind, without a doubt, a buck that is not pressured will give up the wind more than a buck that is pressured. So it's probably the reason the buck is doing this is because of lack of pressure. And I think if he caught you one time in your stand, he's not coming past there in daylight again without scent checking that area from downwind. So I would not change my tactics at all as far as hunting that buck.
What would you do?
I think there's a direct correlation between pressure and a buck playing the wind, and you see bucks do things here or on a low pressure place that would shock you, and then in a higher pressure situation. Al Foster wrote a article called what was it, the weak spot. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a high pressure area, you've got to find the weak spot, whereas if you're on the Higgins farm, you kind of are just blowing your wind into an area of low deer likelihood, and that buck, he could come with a tailwind.
Yep.
All right, well, that was the last question. Real quick before we wrap it up, Midwest Sportsman's Classic, again, when you call, I'm going to put it in, excuse me, in the description down below. The hotel with the coupon code, make sure you're getting your discount if you're coming to Shipshewana to listen to any of the legends that will be with all of those segments. Our friends at 360 Blinds will be doing an unveiling of a new product at that show, world premiere. They're actually not going to show it at Harrisburg and going to show it at Shipshewana, so that's pretty exciting. And then obviously all the other vendors are going to be there. Make sure you click that link down below and use your coupon code to save you some money. I would be remiss if I didn't make sure that everyone knew to stick around after the closing credits, because Wes Delks is doing our Sunday night prayer time. And we put this at the end of the podcast every week so that a lot of the people who listen on the audio platforms can have a chance to listen to it that don't have it on YouTube. That segment also posts by itself around 7 o'clock every Sunday night. So make sure you stay tuned at the end of this to listen to Wes. He's taking a turn this week for Sunday night prayer time.
Well, that's all I got. You want to sign us out, Wes?
Best of luck chasing giants. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
God bless everyone. See you next week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
chasing one specific deer is an emotional journey that has high highs and low lows. And I just encourage you, Chasing Giants listener, as you're going through the deer season, that your joy doesn't come from circumstances. Your joy doesn't come from big bucks. Your joy doesn't come from people. Whatever's going on in your life, just know that the joy of the Lord is your strength. And James 1:2 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." We can find perfect peace in Christ alone. And if we're letting our circumstances dictate our joy, then you're going to have a roller coaster of emotions. But what is the baseline of your joy? And if the baseline of your joy is to rejoice in the Lord always, again I say rejoice. If the baseline for your happiness, for your mood really is Christ, then your highs are never going to be too high and your lows are never going to be too low. And let the baseline of your joy be Jesus Christ. I want to say a prayer, and best of luck to all you rut hunters that are still going after it and having good rutcations, hopefully. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessings you've given us, and just the opportunity to chase the whitetail and have the Chasing Giants listeners be a family of support for each other and for other people. I pray that we would be unselfish people and look for ways to be a blessing, bless other people. And as this rut goes on, as we're sitting in the deer stand, that gives us time, not just to think on chasing the next big deer or improving our property, but gives us time to reflect on where the baseline for our joy comes from, where it needs to be, and what we can do to bless other people. And it's when we give to others that we truly receive. So just give people safe and journey mercies as they are traveling from hunting properties and out of state and away from their families. Thank you for just the opportunities that we have, that the whitetail brings us closer together. Amen. Have a great week this week. Hopefully Jesus Christ is the baseline of your joy.